Welcome to ZKast, everyone. I'm Z.S. Caravallo from ZK Research, and as always, I'm your host. I'm here live in person at Arista's campus. It's really exciting to be back in person. It's been a long time, it seems, since we've done this. I'm joined by two great guests today, not just one. Ed Chapman, who's the VP of Business Development and Alliances, Media, Entertainment, and Wi-Fi. Ed, that is one long title.
Thank you.
And I'm also here with Heather Paunet, Director of Product Management. That's a much more compact title. And I'll let both of you introduce yourselves, talk a little bit about what you do here. So Heather, why don't we start with you?
I'm Heather Paunet. I am based here in Arista at Santa Clara office. I've been working on Arista's Edge Threat Management products for the last 4 years. Other than that, for the last 20 years, I've been in the San Francisco Bay Area working for various networking and cybersecurity companies.
How about you, Ed? You're a longtime Aristan.
I am a long-time Arista. I've been with Arista since, it's coming on 11 years, and worked with the team for a long, long time and other companies. Excited to be here. I think I'm happy that we're together and not in a virtual sense.
Yeah.
Looking forward to the conversation. And from my perspective, it's a great time to have this conversation because people are coming back to work and there's a lot more opportunities for us to provide new solutions in the marketplace.
Yeah, and while I love Zoom, I can only do so many Zooms. And before I get started, though, I do want to give a quick shout out to eWeek. eWeek is my media partner. All ZKasts are done in conjunction with the eWeek eSpeaks program. Now, we're going to be talking about a relatively new solution for Arista that targets the mid-market, right? And which is interesting because when I think of Arista, I don't really think of mid-market. I think of web scale, I think of large enterprise, I think of trading desks and things like that. So I am, pretty excited that you moved into this market given the heritage of where you came from. Before we talk about the product though, let's talk a little bit about the mid-market itself. What challenges are you seeing in this environment for IT pros that maybe they didn't face before?
So I think there's a couple of key trends that are driving us to take a good look at this market. So first and foremost, companies of all sizes are more and more globally distributed than ever. So for example, we did a survey in June to our channel partners, and we found that 33% of businesses with 500 employees or less are globally dispersed across 50 locations or more. And that's pretty huge. So
even with only 500 employees?
Exactly, yeah. Now that does take into account, of course, remote employees as well, working from home, but there's a lot in there of HQ and branch offices as well. So for the IT department, how do you connect that many people globally dispersed? How do you give them access to business applications and services when they're so globally dispersed? And what do you do about people that are connecting from all sorts of different Wi-Fi networks that IT doesn't necessarily have control over? And then another thing that is very prevalent to mid-markets as well is just the sheer number of attacks that have been in the news for the last 12 to 18 months. So Colonial Pipeline, JBS Foods, those types of things. For a mid-market company, if you get hit by one of those and you have a huge ransomware demand, you're not necessarily going to be able to stay in business if you pay that. And every day your business is down, you're less likely to be able to ride it out compared to an enterprise company.
Yeah, in fact, I talked to a hospital in Florida that they told me they were buying Bitcoin just to pay the ransoms, right? So they didn't even try and fight it anymore. They were just paying them, which to me is the wrong way to do it. Now, again, when I think of Arista, I think of big iron and trading centers and things like that. So what was it about the mid-market that you found so attractive that thought you wanted to be part of that now?
Well, I think one of the things you just brought up, web scale, large enterprise, and taking that knowledge that we've learned from our cloud engagements and our large enterprise engagements and delivering a solution that then can be processed into the mid-market or commercial, where they don't necessarily have the same IT staff, right? They don't have huge amounts of people who are dedicated to managing the network infrastructure, have a great amount of knowledge about the threats that Heather was talking about, and being able to provide a solution that solves those sorts of problems for them. Essentially building out an expert system that delivers services to them where they don't have to have a huge IT staff to support. Especially, we talked about, this is not a Zoom session, but if someone's at home and they're experiencing an issue with Zoom or whatever application they're using, it's hard to understand what's going on in that space. They're not, the home users aren't CCIEs. They're not people who
What?
Yeah, exactly. they don't understand what's going on. So you have to provide tools that allow the network administrators, especially for these commercial-sized companies, the ability to troubleshoot that effectively without having to send someone out there, right? And that's where we're taking the findings we found from managing large corporate infrastructure, web infrastructure, and then deploying that in a way that can be utilized by these commercial customers.
One of the things you said is a pretty interesting change in the IT landscape. So before I was an analyst, I was actually in corporate IT. I think you know that. I was in,
right.
And we didn't take any responsibility for people working at home.
Right.
But if you work from home, that was on you. And also, I think when people worked at home, it was generally the technically savvy, the person that could do basic troubleshooting to their VPN connection and things like that. It was really that kind of power user, right? Today, we have people working from home that never worked from home before.
Right.
Contact center agents, inside salespeople, right? These folks have never worked from home before, but yet, we've put the onus on them to be able to troubleshoot their own problems. So now, as I mentioned earlier, you recently entered the mid-market with a product called Q, right, which stands for Cognitive Unified Edge, which is the evolution of your cognitive campus vision. But before we talk about Q, can you describe what is cognitive campus? What's that? What's the vision of that?
So Cognitive Campus is essentially what Arista are doing to build a cognitive network for a business. So it essentially provides a way to build automation for provisioning, for deployment and configuration with a cloud-based component to do that.
All right, now it's built on Arista's CloudVision, which I know you've had for quite some time. Many mid-market customers, though, may not be familiar with CloudVision, so can you provide an overview of what that is?
So CloudVision is a application that manages the entire infrastructure. So we talked about Cognitive Unified Edge. That's the edge of the infrastructure where you've got where essentially applications or devices connect into the network, either through Wi-Fi or a PoE switch. And then CloudVision manages that and provides the information about what's happening at the edge of the infrastructure through the PoE switch into the campus. You have got distribution switches, then into the data center and all the way to the cloud infrastructure, whether you're running at AWS or GCP or one of those. So it's a system that manages the entire network infrastructure and provides a series of tools that allow you to configure, deploy, and through automated AI constructs or machine learning constructs actually identify issues before you may experience them or tell you what's happening, the way an application is being run at a particular site, and tell you, boy, if you change something, you're going to get a better experience. We have the ability to put something called AVA sensors on our PoE switches. I think we talked to you about this. And that's a very interesting thing. If you think about it, we're delivering a tool, because most people right now, whether they use virus checkers or anything like that on their PCs or Apples or other devices, having the ability to have a sensor on a switch, which then allows us to use our back-end AI constructs to identify, hey, this camera that you had for a long, long time, for some reason is talking to a site in Belarus or something. Never done that before. Maybe you should take a look at that. So that ability with CloudVision to manage the entire infrastructure and then also provide additional AI and ML capabilities to identify issues where, in the past you had to have a very large IT organization to understand these things, and we're providing the tools to do that. So CloudVision encompasses the management of the entire network infrastructure from the edge of the infrastructure all the way to the cloud.
When I think of CloudVision, I think of it as your single pane of glass.
Yes.
And I use that because I know some of your competitors have multiple single panes of glass.
Yeah.
Right. So I always, tease one of your bigger competitors, say you're not being the market leader in single panes of glass. It's actually helping your customers out. So now I know there's a lot of AI built into it, and I actually think AI is going to be the biggest change agent in networking that we've ever seen, right? And can you just give a couple of examples of what those AI capabilities are?
Well, I'll give you one example. We have something called quality of experience, and it looks at a wide variety of applications that people use. One of them is, we've talked about Zoom, so I'll just use that as an example. Yeah. We actually built out
a lot of Zoom love here.
A lot of Zoom love. I think it's because it's
the de facto standard.
Yeah, it's almost become like like Xerox, right?
Yeah,
like Xerox, this paper. People say Zoom, people know immediately what you're referring to. So we have built out a model that understands how Zoom should be behaving in a good way, right? And then analyzes all the Zoom traffic off our Wi-Fi access points in a customer's environment. And then if there's anything where there's an outlier, meaning that we know what the behavior of Zoom is when someone's experiencing a good Zoom session, if something starts to become an outlier to that, we can identify that through these AI heuristics and be able to then provide them with, hey, this particular customer or a device or user is experiencing an issue with Zoom. We can proactively tell the network administrator without them having to understand all the ins and outs of Zoom and everything from a Wi-Fi perspective. Hey, why don't you do this? It could be, why don't you change a particular Wi-Fi parameter? We can do that automatically or make a recommendation to do that. Or maybe you need to put a particular QoS implementation on your switches and stuff to make sure that that's a better performing Zoom session in that particular area.
See, what I find exciting about that is one of the things the media has been writing about for all the way back to when I was in corporate IT was that IT needs to be more proactive. IT needs to be proactive. Right. And I get a little offended by that, right? Like IT, it's not like IT doesn't want to be proactive. We just never really had the tools to be proactive.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So you can't be proactive unless you're predictive.
Yep.
And I think what you're talking about there is bringing a level of predictability to how things are running to let IT be proactive finally. So we're not just running around fighting fires all the time.
Yeah, and that's the biggest thing, you know, being able to identify issues, because there's a lot of noise, right?
Yeah.
So
there's a lot of noise.
A lot of noise. So being able to figure out what is really going on and being able, because we have something called a network data lake, which actually CloudVision and all of our devices, Wi-Fi, APs, the edge threat management, all feed into this network data lake that is a repository of information that we can then mine from an AI perspective to understand what's going on. And we're doing this not only across a single customer's network, we're actually doing that across all of our customers' networks, because based upon that information, if someone's experiencing an issue in one area, it's likely that maybe someone else is experiencing that same issue, and we can proactively identify that issue based upon the information we're receiving from a lot of different sources. And we're not forcing a customer to comb through that themselves. Yeah. We have the ability to take a look at that information and raise the relevant points to them so the system can proactively address the issue, or they can make a change on their own.
Now when you rolled out NetDL, I actually thought that was a very seminal moment in Arista's history, because when it comes to AI, right, there's an expression in data science is good data leads to good insights. Well, the corollary is true, where partial data leads to fragmented insights. And I know a number of your competitors have lots of data, but they tend to be fragmented, so you're not really getting a full picture, where I thought you did a nice job with NetDL. Bring that together to let your customers actually have a good end-to-end view.
Absolutely.
So let's go back to Q. Right, so that's what we're supposed to be here to talk about. What is Q? Like, how does it work? Can you give some details on it for that mid-market segment?
I can start off with that.
Yeah.
So Q is essentially everything that you need for a business to get started with IT. So it includes your router, it includes your switches, and it includes your access points powered by the switches, and it also includes threat management to make sure that the network that you deploy is secure all the way across it. So a couple of things it includes our new 710p switches. So those are great for mid-market because they're smaller form factor. They come in 12 or 16 ports and various options for power so that they can power even our most feature complete Wi-Fi access points.
Well, that's interesting. It includes the security as well.
Right.
And is that, so this is another trend that we've talked about for years, right? Bringing networking and security together. And I still don't really believe that's happened in the very large enterprises, you know, where you guys have a big install base, but are you seeing more and more of that in the mid-market?
I think that goes back to a little bit about the globally distributed networks that we talked about there. When people started to all work from home and split up into various different locations, the emphasis there was on getting people connected. And the thought of securing getting people connected was in some cases a bit of an afterthought because everything happened so quickly. But certainly over the last year or 18 months, that has been the piece that you absolutely have to layer on top of it because of the things that we're seeing in the news and that many attacks that we've seen.
So if I'm a mid-market customer and I'm interested in Q, what would my experience be like post-deployment? Like how automated would it be? What kind of AI features are there, things like that specifically for this segment?
Well, everything that we do, we're building to make it as easy to deploy, easy to manage, and easy to provision as possible. So for anybody setting this kind of thing up, when they set it up, they don't even have to go to the physical locations to get everything up and running. Troubleshooting is made very, very easy. Across all of our products, we include things like automatic updates as well, so that everything, once it's set, it will just work.
And have you seen a fair amount of uptake in that, or I know when it comes to automation, use the technical term, it gives some customers the heebie-jeebies, right? So are you finding more and more customers, especially now that IT has to work remote as well, are willing to look at automation tools?
I absolutely think so. Okay, here's the problem. When you now distributed your workforce, right? It used to be, we're here at Arista's corporate HQ, and we were just talking about this before. How many people are coming in, and we're still operating from a remote workforce perspective, and it's worked out very nicely for us. No productivity hits. We're running just like we did prior to COVID. I think now that you've distributed this out, how do you manage that? So if you're going to send out networking infrastructure out to either, maybe it's a smaller work element, workspace, or even to someone's house, you want to have that provision automatically. You don't want to have that person who's receiving that have to go in, okay, I need to do, log into this thing, set up my own IP infrastructure, make sure it's talking to the appropriate, whether it's a VLAN or VXLAN that's going to go out to corporate, set up the VPN, set up all the firewall rule. It's just not going to happen, right? So absolutely people are looking at this and going, I need the ability for this, we call it ZTP or zero touch provisioning, so that when they get shipped out to a location, it's already pre-provisioned. The most complex thing you're going to have to do is plug it in and plug in an Ethernet port. And then the entire thing is provisioned. So absolutely, that's a necessity. And I think that's a necessity whether you're the largest enterprise or you're a mid-market or commercial, because probably more so on a mid-market commercial because they just don't have the IT staff to do it in a large scale. So we're absolutely seeing a huge uptick in that sort of deployment model. And then Heather can talk to you about what that means from a security perspective, because once that's in place, then having the appropriate security policies to ensure that someone working remotely has the same sort of security behind it as if they were in this building, the Arista HQ or customer's HQ.
Yeah.
And I think going back to what you were saying, are they gonna? It's about trust essentially.
Yeah.
So if you're gonna go for things like automated provisioning or automatic updates, for example, you need to trust that the vendor you're using they're not going to update it to something that's going to break. So once you've got that trust, then they're going to set it and forget it, and that makes their lives a whole lot easier.
Yeah, well, I think we're all used to consumer examples where they do break sometimes.
Well,
Yeah. So you did mention the hardware before. Can you just give a bit more detail on that? I know everyone, while a lot of the innovation in networking is in software, people still love their hardware, right? So maybe and talk a little bit how it fits in with the rest of the portfolio.
Yeah, so I mentioned the switches before, the 710p switches. So there's also a variety of access points that can work for any type of environment, indoor, outdoor, all sorts of things depending on how the business is distributed. And then we also introduced what we call our Q series of hardware, and that includes hardware specifically pre-provisioned with our next generation firewall. So next generation firewall is where you get your web filtering, your threat prevention, your virus blocking, and your things like that to keep the network safe and secure. So we introduced 3 Q series appliances for that, Q8, Q12, Q20. And then I was talking before about distributing the corporate network all the way to the edge. So in your branch offices, you would deploy micro edge there. And for there, we have a couple of hardware devices, the Q6 and the Q6E WL, and those are the devices for micro edge. They provide a level of security at the edge. They hook the network back up to corporate, but they also optimize the internet at the branch offices as well.
So it's partial WAN optimizer as well as...
Yeah, absolutely, because sometimes at those branch offices, the internet connection is not going to be as good as it would be at HQ, so that optimization is very important.
And micro edge, do I think of that as somebody's home even? Down to that small?
It can be used at home, but for home, you're going to be able to use various different types of VPN connectivity that you can get to through a next generation firewall and things like that.
Yeah, and I think the benefit that you're bringing here too is, even though the devices are quite varied, single policy, right? Through CloudVision, right? And so
single management application.
Yeah.
It's Q, CloudVision Cognitive Unified Edge, but that manages the entire soup to nuts. It manages from, again, the access point and the devices that are connecting to it, all the way through the PoE switch, and then through the firewall infrastructure, through the micro edge infrastructure, into the corporate HQ, their data center, the corporate network infrastructure, and with Cloud EOS and other operations that we have, even into GCP, AWS, or whatever you may be running, any cloud-based applications.
All right. So now this audience, the mid-market, it's clearly not as technical as a lot of your larger customers, and so they're going to leverage channel more. And so, can you describe, how you're using the channel in this case to help get this product into customers' hands and get it up and running and working?
Well, I think as Ed mentioned before, we are very MSP friendly. So Ed was mentioning that smaller companies, they won't necessarily have all the CCIE accreditation and networking certifications. So what we make sure we do is make sure it's very, very easy for either a small business who doesn't have people with that much knowledge in their IT department, or who rely wholly or in part on an MSP for all their IT needs. We make it really, really easy for them to get up and running with our products and just keep them running overall. We make it really easy for MSPs to support multiple clients and to scale their business with us and grow.
So to net it out, it's very important for us, and we've been reaching out to a variety of channel partners with programs and training around Q. We're very excited about the uptick we've seen from our channel in response to this new initiative for Arista. And it is important because, again, if we think about the commercial market segment, and you mentioned where Arista's had success in the past, we need to scale. We need to embrace the channel and engage with them, because we just don't have the reach in terms of direct sales representatives able to go out and talk to every commercial or mid-market customer that's out there. And really, a lot of times, their trusted advisor in that space will be a channel partner, whether it's an MSP or they're the guy that they've been doing business with for 20 years. So we need to reach out, and with the programs that we have in place, the training that we have in place, we're very excited about the opportunity that Q brings to our channel organization.
All right. Well, last question then. Without getting into too much anything forward-looking, right? I don't want to violate any safe harbor. What's next for the product?
Yeah, so I think one of the things I was mentioning before, the sheer number of cyber attacks that have hit the news recently.
Yes.
The problem is that's not going to go away, and there's going to be more of them.
What's amazing is we're spending record amounts on security technology today, and we're still having record breaches, right? So. Yeah,
but we have to keep going on that. So every time you build a security product that can keep out all the people that know how to break in today, you build something, they're going to break down that wall, and you've got to build something else. So that's going to keep happening. It's kind of like a game of cat and mouse, they're trying to outwit the cat all the time, and they're going to be successful, but the cat's going to keep on coming.
I think that the key thing for us as we look going forward is to, again, continually add features and functionality that enable us to analyze the data that we have in our network data lake, and then raise up that information proactively to customers, again, whether they're commercial or whether they're large enterprises. So we talked about the ability for us to put those what we call awake sensors onto our switches. What that immediately did, as an example, that made every networking device the ability to capture information, send that back to within the network data lake, and then have our awake NDR system analyze that data. And so then that raises up, it's taking all what essentially is a huge amount of data, separates the wheat from the chaff, and elevates that so you can identify, I've mentioned that story about this IP camera is doing something it's never done before. And I think that's doing more of that, where we're starting to look at, are there different things that we can do now that we have this vast repository of information that can make the administration of the network simpler and simpler, and use AI constructs to actually simplify that and proactively address issues. So is there a problem with a particular WAN connection? We're seeing is it the actual physical interface on that, or is it something that's inherent within that network infrastructure that we need to change? So from my perspective, and what we're going to be continuing to deliver into Q and CloudVision and Arista in general is delivering more and more services that take advantage of the network data lake and providing that level of AI and ML constructs on top of it that proactively manage the infrastructure. So I know it's a long answer, but in a more precise way to look at it is we're going to start solving a lot of your problems without you having to do things.
Yeah.
How's
Good
that?
way to put it, yeah.
Yeah, and I know corporate IT spends an awful lot of time doing troubleshooting. In
Yeah.
fact, I do think as people come back to the office, it's going to get harder. I talked to this one company that just redid their entire building for remote work, and they added a bunch of motion sensors, cameras, environmental sensors, and the CIO there said they have more OT devices on the network than IT devices now. So, and those are things that a lot of IT network engineers probably have no idea they're even there.
Yep.
Right. So it's good you're focusing on them. Glad to hear that. So. Anyways, on behalf of Ed and Heather, thank you very much for joining me on this. I think it's a very exciting product and a new market opportunity for you guys, so good luck with that. So anyways, thanks for that. If you're interested in Q, I'll include a link in the description of the YouTube video. Other than that, Ed, Heather, thanks for joining me. I'm Zeus Caravallo from ZK Research. Don't forget to click to subscribe, and I'll see you next time on ZKast.